Goedendag, mijn naam is Huib Bloot, oprichter van Stichting Jarig Job. Met Jarig Job zorgen we ervoor dat kinderen die in armoede opgroeien, dat die een verjaardag kunnen vieren. De ouders ontvangen een verjaardagspakket met slingers, ballonnen, wat lekkers voor thuis, een verjaardagstaart, meerdere cadeautjes en heel belangrijk, die tractatie voor school. Want helaas zijn er zoveel kinderen die zich ziek melden op een dag van de verjaardag omdat ze niet kunnen trakteren. Nou, met die verjaardagspakket zorgen de ouders ervoor dat het weer een feest is. En waar kinderen het gevoel hebben dat ze het waard zijn om een verjaardag te vieren. Trots op schoolplein lopen, kijk eens, dit heb ik van mijn ouders gehad. Hey, kom mee, we gaan trakteren. Dat doen we voor 90.000 gezinnen in heel Nederland. En om dat mogelijk te maken hebben we heel erg de hulp nodig van allerlei verschillende bedrijven. Kleine bedrijven, grote bedrijven, die ons dagelijks komen helpen met het inpakken van de verjaardagspakketten. Dan heb je in 2 à 3 uur heb je ongeveer 200 tot 300 verjaardagspakketten met elkaar ingepakt. Maar daarnaast proberen we meer en meer te kijken hoe kunnen we die samenwerking gaan verdiepen. En dat kan in de vorm van kennis delen, netwerk delen, een stukje productdonatie. Maar vooral kijkend hoe gaan we met elkaar een win-win situatie creëren. Dus dat je niet meer alleen maar bezig bent van jongens, het is maatschappelijk betrokken, maatschappelijk verantwoord. Nee, hoe gaat het voor een bedrijf ook marketingtechnisch interessant worden? Want dan kan je met elkaar impact gaan maken. Wat we nu ook zien met de maatregelen die minder en minder worden, is eigenlijk iedere dag een feestje. Hoe gaaf zou het zijn als al die bedrijven weer zeggen, jongens, weet je wat? We gaan met elkaar weer een feest vieren. Maar wel een feest, waardoor we een feest voor de ander mogelijk maken. Nou, dan kunnen we met elkaar echt een fantastische impact maken.
Dankjewel, Huib Bloot. Dit is echt een fantastisch voorbeeld hoe bedrijven hun tijd en talent kunnen delen met stichtingen die heel hard extra kenniskunde en handjes kunnen gebruiken van het bedrijfsleven. De agenda voor vandaag is als volgt. Chris zal starten met de start, design en implementatie van medewerkersvrijwilligerswerk en de 5 principes die daarvoor zijn. En op het eind van het webinar, de laatste 10-15 minuten, gaan we in gesprek met Chris. Chris is van Amerika. Ik ben al jaren fan van hem. Hij is een TEDx-spreker, oprichter van het RWI Institute en wereldwijd bekend bij heel veel bedrijven en ook bij de United Nations om zijn leiderschap in het vakgebied van corporate volunteering. Hij heeft een hele innovatieve kijk op vrijwilligerswerk en hij heeft het over hoe het niet alleen jezelf, maar ook de wereld verandert. En dat doet hij op een hele wetenschappelijke manier. Dat kan misschien heel saai klinken, maar dat is het niet, want hij maakt het heel mensgericht en heel erg praktijkgericht. We hopen dat dit webinar gaat helpen om als bedrijf de volgende stap te zetten en om ook deze kennis naar Nederland te halen, omdat Amerika hier in voorop loopt. Welcome here in Holland in the studios of Facilicom, and I'll give the word to you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Esther, thank you for setting this up and the organizations that have helped facilitate it. I need to apologize. My Dutch is not much right now, so I will be speaking in English, as I'm sure Esther said. But I'm going to try and speak slowly so that I don't make it more difficult than it needs to be to hear what I'm saying. It's great to be here. I really enjoy speaking about this topic. And I think the 5 principles that have been outlined are phenomenal, a great extraction of the work. We're going to cover those in just a moment. But I wanted to speak to the 40%, which is very interesting. So we'll come back to that reference in a moment. But it is interesting to understand how much of our own perspective when it comes to employee volunteering plays a role. And we're going to explore that a little bit. Like it's not this whole idea of voluntary good in the community is not as straightforward as you might think. Here, I'll give you an example just based on that poll. Most people at a company, when you think about starting, designing, starting, launching an employee volunteering program, the one concern that a lot of managers have or senior leaders have is our people are so busy. They don't have time. And that is true. We're even more busy with the back-to-back Zoom calls. I'm sure that there are a whole bunch of people on this webinar right now who have been on calls, video calls all day long. And this is just one more. And we squeeze them all in. And so when we think about that, and we think about the obligations and the workload of our employees, we tend to think time there's not a lot of time. So what do we want to do with an employee volunteering program? We want to make it small. We want to make it episodic, one and done. We want to make it easy. And we want to be very careful not to ask too much of our employees. And almost every one of those ideas, based on the one thought, our employees are too busy, is absolutely wrong. And so I'll explain that in a little bit. Instead, employee volunteering in general, or pro-social behavior, is very counterintuitive in some ways. So for example, most people will say, if you polled them before they've ever been involved in an employee volunteering program, why haven't you gotten involved before? Or why don't you volunteer? They would say, I didn't know our company did it, and I'm too busy. Those tend to be the top two answers. Didn't know the company did it, tend to be too busy. So after they go, and about 56% of people who get involved in employee volunteering programs are invited. It's somebody who invites them. So now they've heard about it from a friend, and you poll the same group afterwards and you say, why didn't you volunteer before? They would not say, I'm too busy. They would say, nobody asked me. So the perspective completely switches, and people have time to do the things they love to do. We all have time to invest in the things we want to do. And so employee volunteering needs to become something that people want to do. And so the shift isn't how can we get them to do something that they don't want to do, don't have enough time for, and we don't want to bother them, to how do we present something in a way that they want to do it, it makes sense, and it improves their lives. So there's a lot of value in that. And that's a well-structured employee volunteering program. And I think the 5 principles capture that really nicely. So I'm going to just cover those. I'm going to read through them in English in the toolkit. Thank goodness it's all in Dutch, so you don't have to translate it in your mind. But number 1, present corporate volunteer engagement as an HR essential. That's where we're going to start. Number 2, drive company strategy and employee passion. We're going to talk about how do you combine what's interesting to employees to what's interesting to the company towards the end. Number 3, develop a portfolio to recognize the continuum of volunteering. Now, for many of us on the call, this may seem like, I don't know what you mean by a portfolio, and I don't know what you mean by continuum of volunteering. We're going to talk about the 3 stages in the journey of a volunteer in a little bit, halfway through. Number 4, integrate corporate volunteering engagement into your culture. This comes with a logic model or a theory of change. So we're going to cover that right towards the end, and then partner effectively. Now, the great thing about these principles is they're all written out in detail in the toolkit. And so, like I said, and in Dutch, so you're going to be able to access it in more detail. So if you're hearing something and you're thinking, I see what you mean, but I don't really understand it, I need a bit more information, that we can get that to you. That's no problem. That's what the toolkit's for. So here we go. Okay, so let's start with the HR integration. Why do companies volunteer? That's the first question. Why do companies who were built, the idea of a business or an incorporation has been around since the time of Rome. And companies from the very beginning were built effectively as an organization to make things and to make money, right? We're going to make widgets or whatever we make, keyboards, whatever, and then we're going to make money. And the rules of this game are really strict. If you do not make a good thing that can make you money, you have to leave. Like, you're done. Your business, you go out of business. Goodbye. Gone, right? But so when companies begin to adopt a social purpose or community investment or focus on the community, and they give their employee time away, and they give money away, and they even give stuff away, the widgets, it can be very counterintuitive to the model that is made to do none of those things. So why are they even interested in it? In the United States, among the Fortune 500 that were polled, 320 something companies reported, 95% of those companies reported that they have a formal employee volunteering program. There's stats from different parts of the world, but that's the one that's most familiar because I just looked at it the other day. companies have this formal volunteering. They either provide paid time off to volunteer, or they help coordinate the volunteering, or they provide t-shirts and funding for volunteers. They find opportunities, but they are proactively encouraging their employees and supporting their employees in volunteering in the community. But the question again is, why? Because companies, do they make a profit from volunteering? No, they don't. They don't get paid to volunteer. So that is the question: why do companies volunteer? And so here are some reasons, 4 basic reasons that companies give as to why they volunteer. Number one, 80% of employees who volunteered like their company better. Employee sentiment is something that HR obsesses about. How do we get our employee sentiment up? If you have an employee volunteering program and you poll the employees who volunteer in the community and it's done correctly, so there are some caveats, they will report a greater affection towards their company. We're going to explore that in a little bit more detail later, why that happens and what that means. Number two, more than half of HR professionals see engagement as the most important issue for the department. So if employee volunteering can get us there, it is the most cost-effective way to improve employee volunteering across the board. Because what happens with other HR incentives? You give out a free this, a free that, a little bonus, and then that becomes the new normal. And you have to keep adding to that over and over. You have to keep improving the benefits, right? The extrinsic motivations. Employee volunteering, people find their own reasons for enjoying it. They move from an extrinsic motivation to go, somebody asked me, to an intrinsic place. And we'll come back to that a little bit later too. More than 50% of employees who claim they are engaged saw it because they are proud to be part of the company's contribution to society. So there's that sense of we're doing something and I'm a part of something good. And then obviously job satisfaction, my job feels better because of it. So that's not even to mention health, recruitment, retention, skill building, leadership development. You know, all of these lists, there's a much longer list. We didn't put it up here for this presentation because we wouldn't have had enough time. But just to say, it is a pretty well-established fact among companies that have employee volunteering programs that they are seeing some business benefits in these areas. It's not always a direct one-to-one, but it is contributing to the overall health and positive sentiment of the culture. But none of those are the real reason why companies should volunteer. So we're going to dive into that. Those are good reasons. They align with HR goals, but there is so much more value to be explored. And we're going to get into that in just a moment.
Hallo, mijn naam is Mark Gelissen. Ik ben de oprichter van Bizomate, een softwarebedrijf dat is opgericht in 2012. Inmiddels bestaat ons team uit 55 man, verdeeld over 3 locaties: Valkenburg in het mooie zuiden, dan Dordrecht en Schipholrijk. Wij zijn opgericht door 3 ondernemers en toen we begonnen hebben we direct bepaald dat wij ook wilden meedoen aan maatschappelijk ondernemen. Dus we hebben iedereen die bij ons het team komt versterken de kans gegeven om 10% van zijn of haar tijd te besteden aan een maatschappelijk doel. We zijn daar in principe in eerste instantie mee begonnen dat we die doelen dan centraal uitzochten. Later heb ik een gesprek gehad met Lonneke Rosa van de Erasmus Universiteit. Toen ben ik tot de conclusie gekomen dat dat niet bij ons paste. Wij willen eigenlijk de mensen zelf uitkiezen wat ze willen doen en daar ook zelf helemaal voor gaan. Dat is ook een link naar een van de principes van Chris Jarvis. Namelijk dat je moet kijken dat je de passie van de mensen, dat ze die kwijt kunnen in een maatschappelijk werk. En dat zien we echt heel duidelijk terugkomen. Nou, sommige mensen zeggen wel eens, dat is duur hè, wat je allemaal doet. Nou, dat kost inderdaad best wel veel geld. Van de andere kant denk ik dat het meer oplevert dan het kost. Namelijk, ik zie 4 factoren. Eerste, werving en selectie. 60-70% van onze medewerkers zegt dat ze voor ons gekozen hebben vanuit ons MVO. Dat is toch fantastisch. Tweede, persoonlijke groei. Als ik zie hoe jonge mensen binnenkomen, hoe ze groeien door dat maatschappelijk werk, dat is echt mooi om te zien. Derde, ziekteverzuim. Ons ziekteverzuim is laag. We hebben vrij weinig tot geen mensen met burn-outs. En ik ben ervan overtuigd dat dat ook mede komt, doordat als je iedere week iets doet voor iemand die het substantieel slechter heeft dan jijzelf, dat werkt wel tot een bepaalde relativeringsvermogen. En dat helpt. Als laatste, bescherming van onze cultuur. Mensen die MVO leuk vinden, daar een passie voor hebben, komen bij ons werken. Dat zijn dus ook gelijkstemden. Daardoor bescherm je je eigen cultuur. Dus dat was mijn verhaal. Maar ik heb wel nog een vraag voor Chris. Chris, die 10% die wij hebben, zouden we die verplicht moeten maken? Dat iedereen dus die 10% ook echt moet inzetten? Of is het een streefgetal? Daar worstelen we af en toe wel mee. Dus als je dat zou kunnen beantwoorden, zou dat fantastisch zijn. Een hele fijne dag en misschien tot ziens. Goedjes, hoi.
Verhaal. Chris heeft het in het Engels vertaald gekregen. But the question from Mark is: should the 10% be obligated, or should it be a target number? What would you advise this company?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you for that. And I think anytime that we use the word obligate or forcing people to do something voluntary, that we change it from being voluntary or fun or playful and we turn it into work. And there's a great report from 1974 by two individuals, Green and Lepper, and they write, the name of the report is How to Turn Play into Work. The way to do that is to take something that used to be fun and voluntary and now make everybody do it. It doesn't even matter if they enjoyed it before. As soon as I have to do it, it goes into a different category in my mind. So 10% should be a goal on the way to a bigger goal, which could be very engaging programs, enjoyable programs, learning programs. And then you can use 10% as sort of an indicator along the way of achieving that goal. But never should be an obligation, that's for sure.
Thank you.
So why do I say all of that? It's because when we do our work with employee volunteering and giving, we start at the very beginning. And as Esther mentioned, we take a scientific approach to this voluntary pro-social behavior. That's sort of anything that you do. Pro-social means anything that you do that is helpful to the community or others, as opposed to anti-social, which is the opposite, obviously. And employee volunteering is a very strong pro-social behavior. So we go back to the science and evidence-based hypotheses and results, and we ask a basic question at the very beginning when I work with companies and other organizations around the world. Why do we help? What is it about helping other people who are not known to us usually? They're strangers. Where we give our time, our money, our effort, our emotions. Why do we give all of that for free away for nothing? Maybe somebody will say thank you. Maybe we'll feel good. Maybe we'll get a t-shirt from our company, and lots of people like that. That's a good thing. But why do we help? What is it that is so compelling about helping other people that our species, the human species, does it all over the world right now? All over the world, and they call it different things and different, maybe it's part of people's religion, or maybe it's part of their civic duty, or whatever they may see, but we help other people, and human beings do it all over the world, and not just now, but throughout history. The first use of the word philanthropy was from 2,500 years ago, when a Greek poet was trying to describe the actions of Prometheus, the Titan Prometheus, and it's in that story of where he gives away fire to help the human race survive. It is a very old concept, this idea of helping other people. And we want to understand at the very beginning, why do we do it? What is the compulsion of helping? And it turns out there are two main drivers, two kinds of drivers. One is a positive driver, and one is a bit of could be seen as negative. It's not negative, but it could be seen as the sort of the flip side of the positive. So the first reason we help has to do with our physiology, the way we're constructed as human beings, and the way our brains and bodies work. And they did a study about 25 years ago now, and they put people with these little helmets, and they were monitoring the way their brains lit up, and they gave them a simple task online to help another person. Now, before they did this, they had looked at other brain reward systems. Some of them have to do with a runner's high. I'm sure some of the folks on this call in Holland, a very healthy country, Netherlands rather, very healthy country. You guys run or maybe bike. Very athletic compared to maybe it's the stereotypical United States where I live. And you get out there and you're active in the community, and you may have had this runner's high. And what happens in a runner's high is you push past your physical limitations, and your brain releases this concoction of chemicals known as endorphins. And endorphins are naturally occurring morphine. So I don't know if anybody's had morphine, but it makes you feel really good. That sense of euphoria and ecstasy, the ability to just forget that it hurts, you're out of breath, you can't run anymore, you're fatigued. The endorphins say, go a little further, go a little faster. This has been an important part of our evolution as a species. As you can imagine, this reward system keeps human beings alive, right? We can outrun the bear running behind us, kind of thing. It's part of our survival as a species. Then there are a number of different reward systems. You can get a yoga high as well. The most famous one, the most well understood one, is a reward system that has to do with sexual activity. These reward systems keep us as a species doing these things and doing these activities because they feel good, obviously, hopefully. So they put this little helmet on, and they looked at the brain when people were able to help other people. Now, there were two things. I had to see the person I was helping, and I had to understand the significance of the task. It had to make sense to me how this was helping the other person. If those two conditions were met, the brain secreted this concoction of endorphins, which was, according to this scientific report, almost indistinguishable from a runner's high, a yoga high, and sexual activity. I mean, it was that powerful, that compelling, that people wanted to do it over and over. So, Mother Nature has built in this reward system and said, if you help others, you will survive. If you procreate, you will survive. If you stay healthy and run, you will survive. These are the important parts of our survival as a species, and helping others is right up there with these other very critical reward systems. So when we help other people and we see their face and we understand the significance of the task, our brain releases this concoction of chemicals known as, technically, the helper's high. And the helper's high has been studied and researched a lot. And it is amazing to think that this is such an important part of our survival as a species. So that's a positive side. We can feel this sense of euphoria, and I feel good. And in fact, if you ask people why they volunteer, a lot of them will say, well, I want to make a difference and contribution, but it just feels good. It feels good to help other people. And that's why it literally does with these endorphins. The other side of why we help has to do with how we experience pain. If you were to hurt yourself, cut your finger, whatever, you would feel pain not in one part of your brain, but throughout your entire brain. This is something called the pain matrix. And when we feel pain, we stop doing it, right? We don't do it again. We remember that it hurt. But there are neurons way deep down inside of your head that can't tell the difference between experiencing pain yourself and seeing pain in another person, which is extraordinary if you think about it. These neurons mirror the emotions, the stress, the anxiety of the other person. And so when I see someone hurt on the ground in front of me because of a car accident or whatnot, I will rush to help them. Why? I don't know them. There's no benefit. They're not a threat. So why do I intervene? Because I'm in pain too. My brain is saying, stop the pain or leave the pain. So I either intervene or I withdraw. And this is empathy. This keeps us alive as a species. We are willing to risk life and limb on the behalf of other people that we don't know because we are compelled to, because our brain is saying it hurts, stop it. The dark side is we may withdraw. We may say, I can't deal with it anymore. And I think a lot of us, the pandemic maybe did that. We turned off the screens, we turned off the news. We just couldn't deal with it. There's too much overload. And it just felt bad. And it literally, your brain is firing up your pain matrix when that happens. And that's what happens too. But that withdrawal can keep us from intervening and being a part of a solution. So that's why we call it the dark side, how we experience pain. Now, here's the only thing about empathy. You only feel it for your in-group. And there's a lot of detail we could go into here, but I'm just going to touch on it. Our in-group are people who share a lot of similarities with us. Their skin tone is like us. That's one indicator. We went to school with them. We speak the same language from the same part of the world, but from the same village. We drive the same car. The more similarities, the more we're going to go, you know, you and why aren't we friends? We're so much alike, you and I, we should hang out. That kind of similarity, you feel a lot of empathy. Your brain will feel a lot of sympathy, sympathetic, those mirror neurons will fire up for people in your in-group. But the further out we get from our in-group, people who are further away, who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, who have a different culture and a different religion, the less similarity, our brain does not register them the same way. And so Lasana Harris did this study, and Dr. Lasana Harris, he put people in the fMRIs, the magnetic resonance imaging systems. You put people in a tube and you can see their brain. And they showed them a whole lot of pictures. And they actually did this study at one of the universities in the Netherlands. That's where it began. And they showed them all these pictures of people from the neighborhood, you know, policemen, barbers, just typical individuals. And they weren't all white. There were different ethnicities and whatnot, but they had a lot of similarities to the people in the machine. And the medial prefrontal cortex in the brain fired up and it said human, human, human. This is the part of our brain, 1/17 millionth of a second, it registers somebody else as human. So it fired up when these folks saw these images. But then they showed somebody who was way outside of their identity circle. This was a homeless individual. And they looked at this part of the brain and it was completely silent. This part of the brain does not light up when I see a chair or a wall or a building. It only lights up. It shoots. You know, there's this activity there when I see a person. And the brain is hardwired to not register people who are like us as humans. This is a shocking revelation. And Lasana Harris has duplicated this study in almost every country around the world to account for cultural differences. But when you show someone who's too far away from somebody who's like me, that out group, that's what they call it, that out group, my brain doesn't register them as human. So as you can imagine, for every in-group that I may be a part of, people are like me. There are dozens of groups that are not like me. And I just don't feel as much empathy for those folks. And it's not because I'm a bad person. It's just because it's the way my DNA was constructed, and it's the way your DNA was constructed. And Lasana Harris calls it flexible social cognition, the ability to humanize and dehumanize other people. And one of the things that we try and do with employee volunteering, I'm going to go back to that original comment. Those HR priorities are good. Employee sentiment, retention, recruitment, all of that is really good. But that's not the real value. The real value is by providing people an experience with their out groups to broaden our sense of who's in and who's out. If you want to get to really critical business issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee volunteering is one of the most brilliant, safest ways to give people an experience with their out group and allow their brain to rewire. And this is because of something called neuroplasticity. The brain is very malleable. It's fixed, but it can change. And when you're in a situation where your experience does not line up with your expectation of how the world works, if I walked into a room and saw a chair floating in the air, that does not fit my experience. My expectation is chairs are on the floor. Why is this chair floating? I am open, I'm curious, and a chemical is released, acetylcholine is released in my brain, and in that part of the brain, it says, we need to change because the world is working this way, and we thought it worked this way. And it begins to rewire itself for that new experience. So imagine having an experience with your out group where they become more human and your brain begins to rewire itself. This is the genius of employee volunteering. So when people have this experience, there are three things that happen, and this is how your brain rewires itself to humanize your out group. And remember, this is all part of dealing with inclusion and equity and diversity. For example, number one, we alert to the situation, the chair is floating, what is going on, we orient ourselves to it, and then we act. There's a behavior that comes with that. And the more time that's repeated, the stronger the pathways are. So in an employee volunteering program, we want to create space for people to have this, we call it a disorienting dilemma, where something that they're experiencing does not line up with their expectations. They alert to it, they orient, and they act. And it's a bit like if you've ever had a lawn and people in your neighborhood start cutting across it. At first, they just trample down the grass. But the more people that see that as a shortcut to take it across your lawn, it gets turned into a bit of a dirt path after a while. It's very frustrating. So you go out and maybe you lay new sod, but they keep doing it. So now you think, I'll just put a piece of concrete down and it can be a path. And that is how new neural pathways happen in our brain. The more times we revisit the experience, the stronger it is. So it's very important in our employee volunteering to think about transactional versus transformative volunteering. Transactional volunteering is one and done. Let's go, let's do a good thing and feel good about it. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. What's better is something that's transformative. What's better is something that allows us to have an experience where our physiological construct changes. And we're looking for changes in 3 areas. Number 1, a psychological change. How I see myself in the world. That's fundamental. Am I someone who has agency, the ability to act, the ability to see that other person and include them? Convictional change. What I believe to be true. We all have a lot of beliefs. Most of them are mostly right, but there's a lot of wrong in there too. And this is where our hidden bias and our unconscious bias hides. We need an experience to lift that out of the darkness, to see it and to deal with it. And then finally, behavioral change, how I act in the world. And this lines up with alert, orient, and act, right? Psychological change, how I see myself, convictional change, what I believe to be true, and behavioral change, how I act in the world. To do that really well, we need to meet people at their highest level of contribution. And so you'll see there are 3 stages in the journey of a volunteer. And Esther, I think you're just going to click through these as I talk. Don't wait for me. That's good. Because we built the slide very fancily so it pops up. But the first stage of a volunteer is similar to when you're a tourist and you travel somewhere for the first time. I remember when I went to Holland for the first time. You guys might think this is funny. You folks might think this is funny. I'm trying not to say you guys all the time. Okay, you folks might think this is funny. I was in Amsterdam with my brother. It was back in 1998. And we were taking a bike tour through Europe. We'd been on our bikes for 4 months. We started in Egypt and worked our way back, and we were going to fly out of London. So we were in Amsterdam, and I had heard that the French fries in Amsterdam and Belgium were, forget about it, just they were out of this world. So we were right downtown in the city. I can't remember where, and there was this little kiosk or something, and they were offering French fries in a big newspaper cone. And we were like, we are hungry. That is cheap. We are poor. Give us one of those. So we get this big one and they're about to give it to us. And just before they hand it out the window, they squirt all of this mayonnaise on top. And I remember looking at my brother and thinking, is this a joke? Are they mad at us? Did we do something wrong? They just ruined our French fries. Why would they put mayonnaise? Had never heard of this before. So we walk away. We're very hungry. We took a bite. I eat mayonnaise with my French fries every time since that day. Like that is the best idea ever. But I didn't know that. I was a tourist. I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? I don't understand. I'm new. I go to the tourist hotel. I get on the tourist bus. I'm there for the first time. And people who volunteer for the first time often have those kinds of reactions as something that everybody else thinks, of course, this is what we do. We put mayonnaise on a French fry. Everybody knows this. Well, I didn't because I'd never been there before and I didn't understand it. When people show up to volunteer for the first time, they're very much like tourists. They don't really know what to do. Somebody asked them to go. They're just there to do a favor for their friend. And they have very low expectations. 70% of the people who show up at an employee volunteering program are going to be in that tourist category. It's not a part of what they do all the time. But if we present it right, if we do it in a transformative way, they may want to come back because while I came because my friend asked me to come, I'm extrinsically motivated. There's this outside reason to come. If I have the ability to see who I'm helping and there's this task significance, the helper's high will kick in. It'll feel good. And I will become curious because if I've had a disorienting dilemma where my expectations do not line up with my experience, I may come back because I've moved from casually curious to meaningful discovery. There's something valuable here and I don't quite know what it is, but I need more of it. And so I will move from this casual curious place to that of a traveler. And I like Holland and I come back pretty regularly. If I'm flying through, I stay a couple of extra days. I explore the countryside. It's awesome. But I'm a traveler. I'm still learning, but I'm learning because there are things about the country that are really interesting to me. And that's a lot like stage 2 of the journey of the volunteer. So while there are 70% are going to be tourists, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, 25% are going to be travelers. They're going to be people who are volunteering 50, 100 hours a year, and they've shown up at your program. You need to give them something a little bit different than a tourist. The tourist just needs a great experience, but a traveler needs a way to engage and get involved. And then the third stage, and this is only about 5% of the people who volunteer, are guides. They're volunteering anywhere from 100 to 900 hours a year. We have interviewed guides at companies who volunteered. This last one was 938 hours a year. It's like a full-time job. Why? Well, he doesn't think of it as work or an obligation. It is just who he is. We do what we like to do, and he has found an opportunity that gives him so much meaning that he has aligned himself completely to it. He is a guide, and he includes other people. He wants other people to feel that way, and it's like I fell in love with the Netherlands and went to Nijmegen and bought a little house and moved in. That's what it would be like, right? Yeah. So that's a guide. And I talk about how great the Netherlands are. I explained it's not Holland anymore. Now we're saying the Netherlands. I explained why, because Holland's just a region in the Netherlands. I talked about it. Netherlands does not pay me. I don't get emails to remind me. I just want to do it. It's who I am. So in our employee volunteering programs, we need to create space for everybody to have a great experience at a tourist level. We need to pay attention to who our travelers are, find them with the right kind of questions, give them more opportunities to get involved because they're looking to discover more. And then our guides, elevate them, help them lead the events, help them run it, help us find the partnerships that work. If we do this, if we meet people at their highest level of contribution through this tourist traveler guide, we will solve almost all of any barriers that we are having in our employee volunteering program. So that's the 3 stages of the journey of the volunteer, and you can go into more detail in the toolkit.
Yes, thank you, Chris. It's amazing how you compare volunteering with French fries and how you fit the Dutch story in this. In de studio hebben we Ronald Smit. Welkom van de Vattenfall Foundation.
Klopt.
Over de 3 typen vrijwilligers en de 3 stages.
Ja.
Heb jij een heel mooi voorbeeld.
Nou, ik vond het voorbeeld van Chris, zijn ervaring in Amsterdam ook heel mooi. Maar die type vrijwilligers kennen wij natuurlijk ook. En de kunst is om je aanbod en je activiteiten zo divers mogelijk te maken en te houden, zodat je ook wil dat iedere medewerker eigenlijk in de gelegenheid stelt om bij te dragen en mee te participeren. En daar zit een spanningsveld, want het is continu zoeken naar wat het beste aansluit bij de doelgroep. Ja. En de een die vindt het fijner om met zijn werk bezig te zijn, dus werkgerelateerd. De ander is juist benieuwd om andere werkgebieden te kennen en open te stellen aan andere problematiek. De een wil het liever alleen doen, de ander in een teamverband. Dus dat is continu zoeken. En wat aansluit bij Chris is, dat is wat we wel gemerkt hebben de afgelopen periode, is dat we door het vele thuiswerken wel een enorme slag hebben gemaakt met digitalisering van onze activiteiten. En dat sluit wel goed aan bij wat Chris dan de tourist noemt. Yeah. Dat is nieuw, dat is in het begin een beetje spannend. Dat weet je ook niet helemaal, maar het is heel laagdrempelig. En wij hebben daarmee ook gezien dat je een enorme nieuwe aanwas van vrijwilligers hebt gekregen. Ja. Dus dat is een goed voorbeeld.
En dat voorbeeld digitalisering, kun je dat concreet maken? Want dat hebben we ook op de slide staan.
Ja,
hebben de mensen gedaan?
Ja.
Was het ook transformatief? Dus zijn ze ook veranderd door die vrijwilligerswerkervaring?
Ja, wij hebben met Stichting Present hebben wij dit samen gedaan. Digitaal voorlezen. Dat was voor bewoners van verzorgingstehuizen waar tijdens de lockdown ook echt geen bezoek mogelijk was. Dus dat waren oudere bewoners die niemand zagen buiten de verpleging om. En wij belden in via de iPad op een manier zoals we nu ook met Chris praten. Om eventjes een gesprek te hebben. En daarbij merkte je eigenlijk dat een containerbegrip als eenzaamheid onder ouderen, wat toen een actueel onderwerp was en nog steeds wel, eigenlijk veel meer duiding gaf van dat zijn echt mensen die niemand zien en spreken. Dus als je daarmee in gesprek bent, ook al was het maar even de krant voorlezen of een verhaal of even over de verkiezingen, over vroeger praten, dat maakte eigenlijk niet uit. De oprechte aandacht, dat deed heel veel met mensen. Ja. Dus, en ik denk dat de digitalisering daar ook een versneller kan zijn, als je kijkt naar die 3 stadia, dat je eigenlijk van een toerist naar een traveler naar een guide, misschien wel door digitalisering ook veel sneller die stappen kunt maken. Omdat het je ook gewoon makkelijker is. Dus dat vind ik ook wel interessant.
En hoe heeft het de medewerkers veranderd die meededen aan het digitale voorleesprogramma? Want je vertelde over die klantenservice medewerker.
Ja.
Wat gebeurde er? Ze kwam terug naar vrijwilligerswerk. Ze had voorgelezen digitaal in het programma.
Ja. Nou, binnen Vattenfall spreken we natuurlijk heel veel klanten dagelijks. En het voorbeeld wat ik met je besprak inderdaad is dat er een medewerker, een collega van de klantenservice, best wel een aantal hele intense gesprekken had op die manier met dat digitaal voorlezen. En daarna eigenlijk veel meer eigenlijk een inkijkje had in het leven in een verzorgingstehuis. En het leven misschien ook wel een beetje als een oudere tegenwoordig. Dus die kreeg daardoor veel meer begrip en ook veel meer geduld. En die gaf aan dat eigenlijk ieder gesprek met een oudere, die soms ook belt voor een praatje, veel beter kon plaatsen dan daarvoor. Dus wat
mooi.
Vrijwilligerswerk brengt voor een medewerker is natuurlijk altijd vrij lastig. Maar dit was een heel duidelijk voorbeeld in het dagelijks werk wat die collega ervaarde. Ja.
Van een transformerende ervaring door het vrijwilligerswerk.
Door het vrijwilligerswerk, ja.
And Chris, you didn't understand it, but you know what we were saying because we tested it. We have a time issue, Chris. I don't know if you looked at your watch because you're such an amazing storyteller, and the time always flies when you are telling about your corporate volunteering. It's 15 minutes after 4 o'clock, so we have 15 minutes left. Part for the questions and part for your story. So people, if you have any questions, als je vragen hebt, zet ze in de chat en deel ze met ons. Onze studio gaat ze bekijken en we gaan ze stellen aan Chris op het eind van het webinar. So Chris, we have like 5 or 7 minutes to finish wrap up the webinar. And then start questioning you about this story that you tell us.
No problem.
Okay.
Here we go. So, as we wrap this up, the difference between transactional volunteering and transformative volunteering you're going to see on the screen right now. Transactional volunteering, I have to say, it's not bad. It's just not good enough. The focus is on the task. We want to do something to make a difference. It doesn't typically turn into long-term relationships with the nonprofit, which goes to that final point in the 5 principles of partnership. And it's very unlikely because it's just one and done. It's like going to the gym once a year. You're probably not going to see a lot of good changes in how much muscle you have just once a year. You need to have a more transformative approach where the focus is people and the change that's happening at a psychological, convictional, and behavioral level. It needs to be a guided experience so people can move from tourist to traveler guide. Not everybody will, but that's okay. You create the space for that to happen. It requires a leader who understands that at the event with the brief and the debrief, the goal is to change the way we see the world. That is the physiological change that we want to happen, where we are more inclusive of other folks and other ideas and perspectives. And then finally to see that happen in how we think, behave, and act. So to do that, just to see the 5 principles again, we want to present corporate volunteering engagement as an HR essential. The typical list is great, but you can go a lot farther. There's a lot more value to be found that would really help your HR department. Secondly, you want to drive company strategy and employee passion. We're going to talk about that in 30 seconds. Develop a portfolio of recognizing the continuum of volunteering. That is the Tourist Traveler Guide. Integrate corporate volunteering engagement into your culture. We're going to talk about that in a slide in 30 seconds. And as I said, partnering effectively means a long-term relationship where you go and you continue to go and provide those opportunities. So let's talk about motivation in 30 seconds here. People start extrinsically motivated. Somebody asked me to go. I don't know anything about volunteering. I don't volunteer. I didn't go because I love volunteering. I need a chance to fall in love with volunteering. Every employee volunteering opportunity should be thinking, how do we give people such a great experience they fall in love with it? And then as you build other opportunities to lead and get involved, you have to pay attention to intrinsic motivation and allow people to find their own reasons for coming back. Now, that brings us to a simple tool. I won't talk about it. It's on the blog. You should be able to find it a number of ways through the toolkit too. Start with the WIFM. This is something that Escape came up with, an organization in Europe. And really think through, why would people get involved? What is their own existing reason to go out and get involved in the community? And that can be explained a little bit more there. So you pay attention to what employees want, and you try to line that up with what the company is after. So that means you're going to want to consider a logic model. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And you think about all the outputs you're creating, the number of people who are volunteering, the number of volunteer hours, the number of people you're helping. Those are all just outputs. Think further and go to outcomes and impacts. If you want to find the true alignment of your employee volunteering program with the employees and the company, you need to build a logic model like this. And there's more information about that as well. So finally, in closing, what can you do? Number one, create some proximity. When you volunteer, think about this one thing. Can people visualize the person I'm helping? Remember that study at the beginning where they put the hat on people and looked at their brain when they were helping? You need to be able to see the person you're helping, physically see faces. And if I can't see the face, you have to tell me a story so compelling I can mentally imagine it. And then you have to talk about the significance of the task. Why is putting food in boxes going to change anything? Right? What is the significance of the task? We can give you some examples of that as well. Critically reflect on the experience of the back end. Ask 2 questions at the end. What did you experience? Was it what you expected? Again, that's going to the disorienting dilemma and floating chairs, right? Did you experience what you thought you were going to experience here? When people come to the homeless kitchen, we ask that question. The number one answer is, those homeless men were so polite and nice. Why do they say that? Because they expected them to be mean, dangerous, and smelly. But they had a completely different experience. And now that cognitive dissonance, they have to do something with that. That's critical to a transformative approach. And then shift the emphasis from I'm helping other people to I'm becoming a part of my community. And from fixing other people so they look like me to becoming something different myself through these changes and these experiences. Okay, so now we can do some questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm still fascinated by every time you tell the story about the transformative volunteering, and our audience is too, because I see a question in the chat and it's saying, how do you become from a tourist to a traveler? Like 70% of the employees or volunteers is like tourists, and how do we get them to the traveler or to the guide stage? Can you tell us something, what is necessary for that?
Yeah, each person's journey, this is a great question. So each person's journey is going to be different, take a different amount of time, but typically you need repeated experiences or experiences and opportunities to learn to progress out of tourist to traveler. And here's one of the strongest indicators that somebody has switched. They will switch in their mind. Someone came to me once and they said, listen, can I talk to you? I've been coming here for 6 months and I feel bad about something. I thought I was in trouble. I said, what's going on, Jim? And Jim said, well, I was coming because I was helping, but now I think I'm coming because I'm getting more out of it than I'm giving. Like, I need this. This is a really important part of my life, but I think I'm taking up space and maybe other people can be involved in. I said, Jim, this is exactly the point. This is where you want to go with your journey. It's not about fixing other people for you anymore. It's about how, with the little that this homeless community has to offer, they are changing your life through your relationships because of the people you know. And that's how you know someone has moved from stage 1 to stage 2. The whole thing turns around.
Yeah. Then, thank you. The second question, and I think the final question before we finish the webinar is, you talk about diversity and inclusion and how volunteering can help diversity and inclusion, which is really a big theme nowadays. So what is the relation and how can employee volunteering really support this diversity and inclusion policy in companies? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I can give it. How much time do I have? I can have a little tiny example. I can do it in 4 minutes. But
5 minutes. 5.
How many?
5.
Okay, easy peasy. So we took a number of folks to a food bank. And they were mostly men. There was one woman from a sales department, and we went to the food bank. And before we began, we said, during the brief, one of the things you're going to notice here is that most of the people who come are women. And here's why. According to the studies out of the UN, 2% of women's income goes to feed and clothe and keep their family safe and healthy. Only 22% of men's income goes to that. They spend money on a whole bunch of other things, right? entertainment, just a bunch of other things. They spend it. Alcohol was a big one. So the people who come here are going to be women. Now, one of the folks at a food bank in Singapore came to me with a question once, and I want to share it with you and see what you think. The question was from a woman who was at that food bank, and she came up and she said, I have $2.40. I think it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, $2.40. And I have two options today. Thank you for the food, by the way, she said. He said, no problem. She said, I can either use the money to go to a interview across town and come back. I've been to several interviews and I haven't gotten a job yet, but I might get this job. And if I get the job, I can feed my family. Or I can use this money with the food that you're giving me and I can get enough food till Saturday. What should I do? And then I said, everybody in the group, turn to the person next to you and say, let's give her a name, Heather, whatever. Hi, my name is Heather, Amy. And what do you think I should do? Should I buy food or try and get a job? And they all answered it. They all imagined whatever. Didn't even matter what the answers were. But the point was to get everybody in that group to imagine what it would be like to be the other person, to be that woman. And then we all were helping and we were talking about Amy and we were talking about what we could do. And we were talking about the injustice of women spending so much and why is that true? And women seem to have less resources in the community. And at the end, when we did our what did you experience, what did you expect, we talked about that a little bit. And then we just said, are there any inequities between men and women back at the workplace? Something to think about when you go back. Okay, have a great day. Goodbye. That was it. But they were all open to thinking about it. They were curious about it, and they went back and they talked about it. And we didn't force them to think about it. We didn't tell them men are bad, women are better. It's bad that they're not making the same amount of money. We didn't do any of that. We just said, imagine what it would be like to be a woman at a food bank. And man, that triggered the conversation.
Impressive. Thank you. So I'm very sorry that's already the end of the hour together. It was great listening to your story. En voor de Nederlanders, ja, hoe iemand vrijwilligerswerk kan vergelijken met patat en sexual activity is heel knap, erg interessant. We hebben een hele bijzondere dag vandaag, want het is de start van Good Busy. En ik wil graag Monique en Ronald en Vattenfall, Facilicom NOV naar voren voor het presenteren van de toolkits.
Dankjewel Esther, dankjewel Chris. Ja, ik ben ongelooflijk trots, sta ik hier namens NOV, dat dit mooie webinar van Chris Jarvis hier kon plaatsvinden. Het is tot stand gekomen in een fantastische co-creatie met Vattenfall Foundation en Facilicom Foundation. Ja, als ik zie hoe wij hebben samengewerkt in het proces hier naartoe, dan denk ik, ja, dat is volgens mij, het was één team. Het is bij uitstek waar Chris het ook over heeft, hoe je je expertise inzet voor een goed doel. Dus dat is super bedankt daarvoor. Jullie hebben ontzettend veel gehoord vandaag van Chris. Ik ken het verhaal en zelfs dan is het veel en moeilijk om het allemaal een plek te geven. Dat hebben we natuurlijk van tevoren ook op geanticipeerd. Dus vandaar dat vandaag de website www.goodbusy.nu live is. Daarop staat alles wat Chris heeft verteld. Er staat ook een fantastische toolkit op die je kunt downloaden. Natuurlijk krijg je ook de sheets en de opname en de link naar de opname van dit webinar nog toegestuurd. Dus je kan alles nog nakijken thuis. Dan wil ik graag besluiten met het overhandigen van de eerste 2 exemplaren van de toolkit Good Busy aan Marjella van Walsum van Facilicom Foundation en aan Ronald Smit van Vattenfall Foundation. En nogmaals heel erg dank voor alles wat jullie doen, want niet alleen het meedenken in dit webinar, maar ook een financiële bijdrage, ook het inzetten van jullie medianetwerk. Dat is allemaal wat jullie voor Good Busy hebben gedaan. Dank jullie allemaal dat jullie hier waren en we eindigen met een prachtige film van Facilicom Foundation. Dankjewel.
Gefeliciteerd.
Ja, dankjewel.
Ik vind het heel erg belangrijk dat iedereen in onze samenleving naar elkaar omkijkt. En dat is ook precies waar Facilicom Foundation op stimuleert.
De Facilicom Foundation ondersteunt projecten en stichtingen die bijdragen aan een inspirerende leefomgeving. En dit doen we door deze stichtingen financieel te ondersteunen, door vrijwilligers in te zetten, onze eigen collega's, of door expertise en kennis in te zetten.
Alleen de foundation richt zich specifiek op kwetsbare groepen in de samenleving, voor wie die inspirerende leefomgeving helemaal niet zo vanzelfsprekend is.
Nou, de Facilicom Foundation heeft Stichting Supercool ondersteund met enerzijds een financiële bijdrage en anderzijds ook door zelf deel te nemen aan het evenement. Met hulp van Facilicom Foundation zie je gewoon dat je een bijdrage kan leveren aan heel veel blije gezichten.
Ik ben bij de foundation gekomen omdat ik maatschappelijke betrokkenheid heel belangrijk vind. En ik heb het gevoel dat ik heel erg ook mijn steentje bij wil dragen aan de samenleving. En via de foundation wordt dat mogelijk gemaakt.
De foundation heeft geholpen om drogers te leveren voor het familiehuis van de Daniel de Hoed. De aanvraag bij de foundation om het familiehuis te helpen was niet moeilijk. Ik heb dat via mail gedaan.
We zijn in contact gekomen met de Facilicom Foundation door Voedselbank Nederland. Voedselbank Nederland was op de hoogte van onze lang gekoesterde wens om een wachtruimte te maken waar we onze klanten een veilig en warm welkom hebben. En ik kan met klem zeggen dat zonder de donatie van de Facilicom Foundation dit niet was gerealiseerd. Door de wachtruimte nu te creëren is er zoveel meer menselijkheid gekomen, dat is ongekend.